NATO traps. Russian MiG-31s in $200 million Baltic showdown using stealth supremacy. Today, tensions over the Baltic Sea escalated into one of the most humiliating confrontations Russia has faced in recent years, exposing operational and strategic vulnerabilities in the MiG-31 fleet. What began as a deliberate airspace violation quickly transformed into a full-spectrum NATO interception, where stealth aircraft, digital command networks, and coordinated electronic warfare exposed the extreme vulnerability of Russia's aging MiG-31 fleet. The encounter demonstrated how NATO's modern systems can dismantle a provocation long before missiles are fired. What follows is the full sequence of events, so the story must start from the very first moment of contact. At 9 AM, radar operators in Estonia were processing routine flight tracks when 3 Russian MiG-31S suddenly turned south, crossed the boundary line, and entered Estonian airspace near Vandalu Island. Their transponders were off, and they maintained complete radio silence. Unknown to the Russian pilots, they had already been detected immediately after takeoff from Petrovos. NATO surveillance had tracked their climb out, altitude, and heading since dawn. The MiGs penetrated approximately 10 kilometers into Estonian airspace, stabilizing at 30,000 feet, where their Zaslon M radar performed best. Below them, the city of Tininrad, home to nearly 400,000 civilians, continued its morning routine, unaware that 3 supersonic interceptors, together valued at around $60 million, were testing whether NATO's collective defense commitments over the Baltic were merely political statements or enforceable realities. The Russian aircraft began circling in a predictable pattern, likely waiting for Estonian fighters to scramble so they could record footage for propaganda, framing themselves as having been intercepted aggressively for propaganda purposes. What the MiG pilots did not know was that 2 Italian F-35A Lightning II jets, part of NATO's Baltic air policing rotation, had already taken off and were silently stalking them. The Italian jets emitted no radar signals. Their distributed aperture system, 6 infrared cameras providing full spherical coverage, detected the MiGs by the heat signatures of their twin Soloviev engines. Through the F-35's advanced $400,000 helmet-mounted display, the Italian pilots could effectively see the Russian aircraft above them as glowing thermal silhouettes. The F-35S carried a radar cross-section similar to a golf ball, about 0.005 m2, making them invisible to the MiG-31's Cold War-era radar, designed to find bomber-sized targets, not stealth fighters. As the Russians circled unaware, NATO's integrated air defense and air battle management system began assembling a coordinated response. Finnish F-18S advanced from the east, deliberately staying visible on Russian radar to push them westward. Swedish Gripens held high-altitude positions over the Baltic with their radars off, receiving constant target updates through the Link 16 network at 128 time slots per second. Estonian controllers issued guidance silently through digital channels, creating a coordinated movement without radio chatter. It became a contest between a unified digital command network and 3 Russian jets relying on old-style encrypted UHF voice messages. The Italian F-35S climbed through 25,000 feet, executing a cold intercept, approaching passively, using no emissions of their own. Their AN ASCII 239 Barracuda electronic warfare suite monitored every sweep of the MiG radars. Each rotation of the Russian search beam revealed the aircraft's position and radar settings. Meanwhile, the Russian pilots continued checking their 6 o'clock, following an instinctive defensive habit unchanged since World War I. They saw nothing. At 9:12 AM, the lead Italian pilot transmitted over guard frequency, the International Emergency Channel. The lead Italian pilot transmitted over the emergency frequency, instructing the Russian aircraft to turn east immediately. The Russian flight leader replied that they were on a scheduled flight, but did not change course, acknowledging the message, but refusing to alter course. Russian military culture discourages admitting violations, especially when recorded. The MiGs held their orbit, projecting dominance over Estonian skies. Meanwhile, their SPO-15 threat receivers began emitting scattered warnings. To the Russian pilots, these seemed like random interference. In reality, the F-35S were positioned directly above them, exploiting the MiG's mechanical radar blind zone. 2 2 stealth aircraft tracked 3 legacy interceptors who had no idea they were being hunted. The technological gap wasn't measured in years, but in decades. The MiG-31 airframe came from an era when VHS tapes were cutting edge. The F-35 had received software upgrades only months before. Without warning, the lead MiG dove sharply, attempting to hide within surface clutter, where radar reflections mix with sea waves and make target tracking harder. The F-35 pilot held steady. The AN/APG-81 radar used Doppler discrimination to separate fast aircraft from slow surface reflections. A fighter at 500 knots could not be confused with a 20-knot wave. The MiG wasted fuel on a maneuver that accomplished nothing. Realizing the dive was useless, the MiG pulled into a steep climb toward 40,000 feet, where the Foxhound performed best, with a theoretical top speed of Mach 2.83. But raw speed meant nothing against an enemy he could not detect. From the F-35's infrared sensors, the MiG engines glowed even brighter against the thin, cold air. Inside the Russian cockpits, confusion grew. Their threat receivers presented contradictory warnings, multiple contacts, inconsistent angles, shifting distances. The Italian jets had activated Barracuda's deception tools, injecting false radar images into the MiG systems. The Russians saw entire squadrons of Phantom aircraft. Then the Swedish Gripens revealed themselves. After loitering 80 kilometers away with radars cold, they suddenly activated their pulse Doppler systems at maximum power. The MiG's threat receivers exploded into full alerts. 2 new contacts appeared from the south. The Russians now believed they were facing several NATO fighters. They still did not know the F-35s were above them. The Finns advanced from the east. The Swedes closed from the south. The Italians maintained silent dominance overhead. A textbook NATO honey trap formed, visible aircraft pushing the Russians toward invisible ones. Sweden, a new NATO member, executed the coordination with the precision of a decades-long partner. Gripen pilots saw everything the Italians saw through Link 16: altitude, speed, projected fuel state, and maneuver patterns. Seeing narrowing options, the lead MiG turned west towards the open Baltic Sea, hoping to reach international airspace. The F-35s reacted instantly, without appearing on radar. One Italian pilot briefly illuminated the MiG with a 1-second radar spike, just enough to trigger a cockpit alarm. Before the Russians could respond, the second F-35 spiked them from another vector. Alarms came from everywhere. None provided a direction. The Russians began defensive maneuvers that burned fuel rapidly. One MiG activated its L-203B Gardenia jamming pod, but the F-35's AESA radar hopped frequencies thousands of times per second, making the jammer useless. Meanwhile, NATO's broader air response was fully activated. Polish F-16s launched from Malbork. German Eurofighter Typhoons departed from Larch. The networked air defense system automatically vectored them towards the same airspace, using data from multiple national radars. An initially limited airspace violation had triggered a multinational air operation, stretching from Sweden to Poland. The lead MiG pilot tried one final show of defiance, turning towards Tininrad as if preparing a symbolic overflight. NATO command centers instantly flagged the change. An armed Russian jet pointing toward a major civilian center changed the threat level. Instead of blocking the path directly, the F-35s herded the MiGs. One radar spike forced them right, another pushed them upward. Each reaction nudged them deeper into an engagement box, where Polish F-16s and German Typhoons held overlapping firing envelopes. After nearly 20 minutes of maneuvering, the MiGs were critically low on fuel. Polish F-16s arrived from the west, locking the MiGs immediately. German Typhoons descended from the southwest, taking the altitude advantage with their Captor-E radars providing overwatch. Within minutes, 10 NATO fighters surrounded the Russians. Italian F-35s above, Swedish Gripens to the south, Polish F-16s to the west, German Typhoons to the southwest, and Finnish F-18s pushing from the east. Danish and Norwegian fighters were preparing to join if needed. The lead Italian F-35 pilot switched to single-target track, locking the lead MiG with enough radar energy to produce a sustained alarm. The The firing solution for an AIM-120D appeared with a 97% hit probability. The Italian pilot held the lock for 5 seconds, long enough to compel compliance without violating rules of engagement. Finally, the Russian pilot transmitted that he was returning to base. The other 2 MiGs immediately banked toward Kaliningrad. NATO was not finished. Swedish Gripens formed close escort positions 500 meters off their right wing, recording high-definition imagery of their configuration. At the Polish border, F-16S took over escort duty, maintaining radar lock as the MiGs reduced speed to conserve fuel. Approaching Kaliningrad, Russian Su-27S scrambled to meet them. Instead of victorious pilots returning from a brave mission, they found 3 exhausted MiG crews escorted by a coalition of NATO fighters. The Italian F-35S disengaged only after the Russian aircraft were fully back inside their own airspace. This encounter cost Russia approximately $200 million in operational losses, fuel expenditure, intelligence exposure, and strategic vulnerabilities revealed to NATO. Today's confrontation reaffirmed NATO's control over Baltic airspace and demonstrated that any future Russian operation over the region will have to account for an integrated, overwhelming NATO air response. The encounter demonstrated that any future Russian operation over the Baltic will have to account for NATO's integrated and overwhelming air response. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.